Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we extract the most important nuggets of knowledge to get you truly well informed. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the fascinating world of enterprise agents, and specifically what this means for your potential applications and, the future of work. Picture this, not just one or two, but like many intelligent agents operating within your organization, each handling different tasks. While you, the human, step into a more strategic role, acting kind of like a manager or maybe a skilled supervisor. The big question we're wrestling with today is pretty fundamental. What separates the wildly successful, truly game-changing enterprise agents from those that, well, just don't make the cut?
It's the critical puzzle, isn't it? And it really boils down to a few core ingredients. I was actually discussing this recently with Asaf, who leads AI at Monday and also wrote the GPT researcher tool, which is pretty impressive. And he outlined what he calls three simple ingredients. Now, at first glance, they might seem kind of straightforward, almost obvious, but they offer this really powerful first principles way to think about agent success. And it's not just enterprise, it's really broad, applies to any agentic system.
Okay, let's unpack these then. What are these fundamental elements for success?
Right. So first, the greater the value the agent provides when it's correct. That's number one. Second, the higher the probability that it will actually succeed, get that correct outcome.
Right.
And third, the lower the cost if it happens to be wrong. Those three things, they really form the bedrock.
And what's helpful, I think, is that you can actually frame these three elements within a kind of practical equation, right?
Exactly. It's sort of a fun little equation.
Sure.
Basically, the probability of success times the value when it's successful, minus the cost when it's wrong. That whole result must be greater than just the overhead cost of running the agent itself.
Right. Makes sense. So our mission here in this deep dive is to explore exactly how you can, well, significantly boost the positive side of that equation, make the result go way up.
Precisely.
So let's start with that first lever then. How do we increase the value an agent delivers when it does get things right? Part of this, I'm guessing, involves being really strategic about selecting the problems in the first place, identifying areas where agents can genuinely generate high value right off the bat.
Exactly right. If you look at the agents that have already had, significant breakthroughs, you see them popping up in spaces like the legal sector. Think about Harvey, for example, or in finance, where agents are getting really good at complex research and summarization tasks. These are domains where people or companies traditionally pay quite a lot for specialized expertise. The work itself is just inherently high value. So when an agent can do that work accurately and efficiently, the value it unlocks is, well, it's immense.
But it's not just about picking the right industry, is it? It feels like we're also seeing a pretty big shift in how we interact with these agents, and that itself boosts the value, moving beyond just quick transactional answers.
That's a really crucial distinction, yeah.
Yeah.
If you think about older Q&A systems, or even a lot of traditional RGI applications, RG being retrieval augmented generation, that common technique for grounding LLMs with specific data, they were usually aiming for these rapid, 5-second responses, get in, get out. But the current trend, what we're seeing now, is more towards what you might call deep research agents. These are agents that can run for extended periods, maybe even hours, really digging into complex topics to synthesize comprehensive insights.
It kind of reminds me of the evolution we've seen in the code space, actually. We started with things like inline auto-completion, tools like Cursor, maybe. But now it feels like we're seeing this rapid expansion of ambient agents that work more autonomously in the background, sometimes for hours. This isn't just a co-pilot anymore. It's an agent doing really substantial long-term work. And that naturally elevates its potential value, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, yeah. By designing the UI and the UX, the user experience, to support that longer-term, more substantial work, you intrinsically empower the agents to deliver greater value. They're tackling more complex, more profound tasks instead of just giving superficial answers.
Okay, that distinction for increasing value makes perfect sense. Now, let's pivot to the next critical piece, increasing the probability of success. Because, it's one thing to get a prototype working, something you can demo impressively, share on Twitter, whatever. But getting an agent to reliably function in production, especially inside an enterprise, that often feels like a whole different ballgame.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly where the rubber meets the road. Enterprises, they frequently demand a much higher degree of predictability, control even. They might need, for instance, that step A always happens before step B every single time. And what you can, prompt an LLM that's a large language model to follow that sequence. You can't really guarantee it 100%. Maybe the LLM gets it right 90% of the time. But for critical business processes, that uncertainty is often just not acceptable.
So if just prompting the LLM creates too much unpredictability. Is the solution injecting more determinism? There's this whole debate, isn't there?
Yeah.
Workflows versus agents. But it sounds like you're maybe advocating for workflows and agents. How do those two things actually marry up effectively?
That's the strategic insight, yeah. I think the most effective agentic systems often blend the two seamlessly. They combine structured sequential steps, where, like you said, agent A always calls agent B with the more flexible, looping tool calls that agents are known for. It's about consciously choosing to make more parts of your agent deterministic, wherever that predictability is really essential. Frameworks like LangGraph are actually engineered specifically to support this whole spectrum. They let developers pick the right balance for their specific application.
Okay. And beyond just how the agent is built, there's also this big challenge of perception, right? Enterprises often seem to operate with really high error bars when they look at new agent tech. There's just a lot of uncertainty, maybe even fear about how these things will perform in the real world. How do we effectively lower that perceived risk?
Transparency, that's paramount here. This is where really robust observability and evaluation solutions become absolutely critical. Take something like Langsmith, for example. While, we initially developed it mainly for developers to see inside their agents, it's turned out to be incredibly valuable for communicating that performance to external stakeholders too, like management or review boards. You can literally show them every single step, every LLM call, everything that's happening. This level of transparency, it just dramatically reduces uncertainty, and it clearly demonstrates the thoughtful, logical processes that are actually unfolding inside the agent.
I remember hearing a really compelling story about this exact point. A user actually took Langsmith into a review panel meeting. They needed approval to put their agent into production.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they basically walked the panel through everything happening inside the agent step by step using Langsmith traces. Apparently, it reduced the perceived risk so effectively that the meeting ended early, which, almost never happens in those high-stakes review panels.
Wow, that's fantastic.
It just goes to show how powerful that kind of visibility can be in building trust, right?
Hey, it's a powerful reminder, yeah. Sometimes the biggest hurdle for new tech isn't its actual capability, but just our comfort level with its transparency.
Hmm.
It fundamentally shifts the conversation away from these sort of abstract anxieties towards concrete, observable processes. And that builds confidence.
Okay, so let's tackle the third ingredient in our success equation, minimizing the cost if an agent does go wrong. Because there's often this maybe outsized fear within enterprises about agents kind of going wild and causing major brand damage or financial loss. How do we effectively address that concern?
That fear is definitely real, yeah. And you're right, it often far outweighs the actual statistical likelihood of some catastrophic failure. But the really insightful approach here is to implement UI and UX patterns that essentially make errors, well, almost a non-issue.
Right, and two particular strategies seem key here. First one being easy reversibility. Like, if an agent makes a change, you need to be able to just instantly undo it.
Code is the perfect illustration of this. Think about a Replit agent generating diffs.
Yeah.
The differences between code versions, or maybe proposing pull requests, PRs. Code itself is remarkably easy to revert. You just roll back to a previous commit, a previous saved version. Replit, for instance, does this really cleverly. It saves every file change as a new commit automatically, so you can always restore a previous state. This inherent reversibility is a huge reason why code development is a successful early area for agents. The ability to just effortlessly reverse changes fundamentally lowers the risk.
And the second crucial strategy, incorporating the human in the loop, HITL. So instead of an agent just directly merging code into the main branch, it might open a pull request instead, which means a human is there to review and approve the work. That single step, it just fundamentally changes the perceived cost of errors, doesn't it?
It's subtle, but it's a profoundly impactful distinction.
Yeah.
It completely recalibrates that cost calculation in people's minds. The human acts as that essential safety net. And we see so many successful enterprise agents relying heavily on these HITL patterns. Consider deep research again. You initially calibrate with it, right? You go back and forth, refining the request to make sure it really understands what you need. Then it goes off and produces this comprehensive report. But critically, it doesn't just publish it or email it out automatically. You, the human, retain full control over that final action.
Or like Claude Code, which clarifies its understanding by asking questions first, and then operates on a separate branch using PRs for changes. This whole first draft mental model, kind of like how legal briefs or essays often get developed, seems incredibly powerful. The agents can do the bulk of the work, generate that initial, maybe massive output, but humans are strategically involved at key decision points to refine and approve.
It's the perfect balance, really. It lets the agent be incredibly productive, generating substantial output, while ensuring human oversight is there at those crucial junctures.
Okay, so we've dug pretty deep into how to build reliable agents now. What's the next frontier? How do we scale this positive value beyond just individual interactions? And this brings us to what you call ambient agents. Tell us about those.
Right? Ambient agents, they really represent that next significant leap, I think. The key idea is they operate in the background, and they're triggered by events, rather than by explicit human prompts or commands. This is the pathway to true scalability.
And the scaling benefits seem huge, right? It changes the whole dynamic from a one-to-one chat interaction to potentially a one-to-many scenario. You could have, theoretically, unlimited concurrent agents running, and the latency requirements are different too, which lets them do more complex stuff.
That's exactly right. With a traditional chat agent, you expect a near-instant response. It has to feel interactive. But ambient agents, they're activated without your direct intervention at that moment, so that rapid response time isn't nearly as critical. This more relaxed latency allows them to perform much more complex, much more substantial operations. Things like, modifying an entire file or even creating a whole new code repository, rather than just suggesting a single line of code or making a quick tool call.
Okay, but it's really crucial to clarify here, though, that ambient does not mean fully autonomous. That
Yeah.
seems like a common misconception, and getting that right helps reduce the perceived risk. Yeah.
Absolutely. Critical clarification, yes. The idea of a fully autonomous agent just running wild is, understandably, a major concern for many organizations. But even with these background ambient agents, there are numerous human-in-the-loop patterns you can just seamlessly integrate. This includes things like straightforward approve or reject options for actions the agent proposes, like tool calls, or the ability to actually edit a tool call if the agent gets something slightly wrong. You can allow the agent to ask clarifying questions if it hits ambiguity, and even implement something like time travel, the ability to revert the agent's state to a past step and then restart it with your corrections. Lots of control points.
And you've identified this interesting intermediate state we're seeing a lot of right now, sync to async agents.
Yeah.
So these are human triggered, but then they go off and perform those long-running asynchronous tasks, like deep research or Claude code, as you mentioned. The human kicks it off and maybe calibrates up front.
Exactly. Sort of a natural evolution, isn't it? Moving from purely synchronous chat agents towards that fully ambient, event-driven future. This intermediate state effectively bridges that gap. And we also envision this powerful user experience emerging, something like an agent inbox, a
Yeah.
place where you can conveniently review, approve, reject, or maybe provide feedback on all the different actions your various agents are proposing.
Can you give us a concrete example of an ambient agent actually in action, something that really brings this concept to life?
Sure, yeah. My own open source email agent is a pretty good illustration. It basically just listens constantly for incoming emails. Those emails are the events that trigger its operation. Theoretically, it could process an unlimited number of emails, so it scales incredibly well. But, and this is the crucial part, it still requires explicit human approval for any outgoing emails it drafts or any calendar events it wants to create. So it's event-triggered, it scales, but the human remains firmly in the loop for any sensitive or external-facing actions.
Okay, perfect. Before we wrap up, let's just circle back quickly to a question we hear a lot. Why is it that code-generating agents, specifically, seem to get so much more funding and attention compared to agents in other fields?
Yeah, it's a common question. It largely boils down to a few key things, I think. Firstly, verifiability. Code, and math, too, actually, are what you'd call verifiable domains. What that means is models can be trained on absolutely enormous data sets because you can objectively check if the output is correct. Does the code compile? Does it run? Does it pass the tests? Does the math add up? This kind of clear, verifiable feedback loop is much harder to achieve for more ambiguous tasks, like, say, writing an essay where correctness can be pretty subjective. So that inherent verifiability allows for much more robust and scalable model training in the code domain.
And it also just naturally fits with those crucial concepts we discussed earlier, reversibility and that first draft model, right?
It absolutely does. Code just lends itself perfectly to that whole commit, draft, preview, revert model. And while that fit is super clear for code, that first draft user experience is actually far more generalizable than I think many people realize. Think about legal writing. It almost always involves multiple drafts, red lines, revisions. Essay writing is another great example. This mental model empowers agents to do the really heavy lifting, generate that comprehensive initial draft. While humans stay in the loop at those critical decision points to refine, steer, and ultimately approve, it just strikes that perfect balance between high agent output and essential human control.
So we've taken a really comprehensive deep dive today into building reliable enterprise agents. A lot to digest. We started with those foundational ingredients for success, maximizing the value the agent delivers, significantly boosting its probability of success, and crucially, minimizing the cost if things do go wrong. We then explored the really transformative power of ambient agents for scaling up and dug into those practical UI/UX patterns like easy reversibility and the human in the loop that make it all actually work in the real world.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe as you, the listener, reflect on all this, think of how these principles could apply in your world. Maximizing value, ensuring reliability, minimizing risk, especially through those first draft and human-in-the-loop patterns. How could they be applied to complex problems or information processing in your own field, or even just your daily life? Where could an agent potentially take on, a ton of the grunt work for you, leaving you to just focus on the critical approvals and the final refinements? Something to ponder.